It was already past midnight when I got home. My hands were stiff from the cold and the cheap hospital gloves. My shoulders sore from leaning over an elderly patient for nearly an hour to help her breathe. I work long shifts in the ER, and that night, like most, I had skipped lunch and ran on burnt coffee and adrenaline. Still, as I stepped through the door of our small apartment, I felt that tiny flicker of warmth in my chest, because Christmas was coming. The lights I'd hung last week still blinked softly across the living room wall. They weren't much, just a $10 set from a corner store, but they gave the room a heartbeat. My tired eyes drifted to the bag by the front door. It was packed already. I'd wrapped the gifts the night before, neatly, with gold ribbon like Patricia always liked. There was a red wine bottle too, and a large container of spiced rice, the kind they all raved about every year, but somehow never seemed to remember I made. They always assumed it came from some catering service. I never corrected them. I had just slipped out of my shoes when my phone rang. I didn't even check the screen. I knew the voice on the other end before it said a word. Harper, my wife's younger sister. Always well-groomed, always poised, always dripping in curated charm. She was the kind of person who said, "darling," with a straight face and could spend 30 minutes describing the aesthetic of a butter knife. "Hi," she said, her voice syrupy. "I just wanted to check in before tomorrow." I thought she was going to ask me to pick up something last minute for the party, maybe gingerbread cookies or a spare tablecloth. I braced myself for it. But instead, she said, gently, "Don't come for Christmas." Just like that. At first, I thought she was joking. "Sorry." She hesitated, then repeated it, softer this time. "Don't come. It's just, we're trying to make a certain impression this year." Still standing by the doorway, I didn't know how to respond. I blinked at the blinking lights, suddenly too bright. "Impression? You know, Grayson will be there. My boyfriend. I've mentioned him. Right. The billionaire. The tech investor who made his first million at 19 and now bought wine that cost more than my rent." I remembered. "We just want things to feel elevated," she added, like I was some scratch on a polished surface. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't come out raw. But then another voice came through the speaker. "Patricia, my mother-in-law." She didn't even wait for introductions. "We'll just pretend we don't know you if you show up," she said plainly, like she was reading a grocery list. I heard Harper gasp slightly, maybe caught off guard by how blunt her mother had been. But no one corrected her. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "So you're saying I'm not invited?" There was a pause. Then Harper said, "It's just one dinner. Maybe next year." I didn't respond. I ended the call and stood there in silence. The room was too quiet, too hollow, like the sound had been sucked out. I walked over to the tree, barely 5 feet tall and missing half the ornaments, but it was ours. I looked at the bag again. The gifts, the wine, the rice. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something crack under my ribs. Not anger, not sadness, just emptiness. I sat down slowly on the couch and stared at the lights. Red, blue, green, yellow. Each one blinking like a heartbeat I no longer felt. What struck me wasn't the exclusion. I've never been the favorite. I've been called too quiet, too boring, just a nurse, even though I'd worked 3 jobs to put my wife through law school. What struck me was how easy it was for them to cut me out. How comfortable they were pretending I didn't belong. I remember a time, years ago, when Patricia cried to me on the phone because their mortgage was 2 months behind. I dipped into my savings and covered it without hesitation. Harper? She'd totaled her car in college, and I was the only one who co-signed for her new one when her credit was tanked. These people knew I would show up. I always did. Until now. The spiced rice started to feel cold in its container. I hadn't even taken off my coat yet. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, letting the silence settle in. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about the billionaire. It wasn't even about Christmas. It was about control. They never saw me as part of them. I was convenient. A placeholder. A man-shaped coat rack. I didn't match their world, so they decided to edit me out. But here's the thing about quiet men. We don't make a scene. We just wait. We let the silence do the talking. And sometimes, silence is the loudest sound in the room. I reached over, turned off the blinking lights, and let the darkness settle. That night, I didn't go online. Didn't call anyone. Didn't explain. I didn't even tell my wife, who was already staying with them to help prep for the holiday. Let them have their performance. Let them polish the silverware and rehearse their accents. Let them tell their stories to a man with $1 billion. Because me? I had something they didn't know how to measure. Value that didn't need to be seen to be real. And they were about to find out what it meant to erase the man who held everything together, not by rage, not by revenge, but by simply walking away. That was the night I decided I wouldn't fight for a seat at their table. I'd build my own, and leave theirs, perfectly empty. There's something oddly freeing about being unwanted. It's not instant. It creeps in, like the cold when you stand outside too long. First, you feel nothing. Then you start to shiver. Eventually, you realize your body is gone numb, and you just stop caring. That's what the morning felt like after that call. I didn't call my wife. I didn't ask for explanations. I didn't send angry texts or question how her family, people I'd helped, fed, carried, could be so dismissive. I already knew the answer. It was never about who I was. It was about who I wasn't. I wasn't rich. I wasn't charming in that dinner party kind of way. I didn't wear cologne with unpronounceable names or network with venture capitalists. I worked long nights in a trauma ward. I came home smelling like antiseptic. My back hurt. My hands were calloused. I was real. And real didn't fit their fantasy. They wanted polish. A curated aesthetic. And I was too textured. I sat on the edge of the bed that morning and looked around at the apartment I'd worked so hard to build with her. The same apartment where her family had celebrated birthdays and baby showers, wine nights and New Year's toasts. They took photos here, laughed here, ate meals cooked by my hands in the kitchen she never used. I paid most of the rent. They never noticed. That was the thing about her family, they never noticed. When Harper couldn't get approved for her car, I didn't hesitate. I signed the forms, paid the fees, and even covered her first 3 insurance payments. She called me a lifesaver back then. But lifesavers get used and tossed once the boat is steady again. And when Patricia called me crying about the house, her voice shaking, her pride barely intact, I didn't even flinch. I drove across the city in the pouring rain, walked into that bank with soaked shoes, and negotiated with the manager for a deferment. Then I wired them $12,000 the next morning. That payment kept them afloat. That payment kept their Christmas lights on. The same ones I wouldn't get to see this year. Funny how that works. They remembered the wine I brought, but never who brought it. They remembered the rice dish, but never who cooked it. They remembered the warmth, the help, the presence, but never the person. But I remembered everything. I remembered how Patricia once told her friend at brunch, he's sweet, simple, very steady, like I was a table leg, functional, not worth admiration, just there to keep things from falling. I remembered the way Harper would lean into my wife and whisper about how I still wore the same black coat from last year, as if owning the same winter coat 2 years in a row was a crime. I remembered when her father once called me noble in a tragic kind of way, like I was a stray dog he might pity but never adopt. All those comments I let slide. All the disrespect I folded into quiet smiles. Because I believed family meant overlooking flaws. I believed love could make you patient. And I believed that, over time, people would see the truth behind the quiet man. But I was wrong. Some people don't see you because they don't want to. You don't fit the picture they painted, so they crop you out like background noise. I stood up, walked to my desk, and pulled out the old black folder I kept tucked behind some medical journals. Inside it were documents, lots of them. Bank records, wire transfers, co-signed agreements, ownership papers. You see, while they were busy ignoring me, they forgot I was the one who handled the back end. Patricia's house, that mortgage they saved face on. I was listed on the emergency relief fund that was linked to her name. The bank had my contact details, not hers. Harper's Boutique, that angel investor she boasted about at her last launch party, that was me. I created an alias, B. Trenton Investments, just to keep her pride intact. Her store lease was in my name. Their family savings account, that emergency pot they liked to brag about in case of a rainy day, that fund had been steadily growing under my management for 4 years. I was the sole manager. They never asked. I never offered. But the truth was, they didn't want to know. They just liked the idea that good things magically appeared when they snapped their fingers. And for a long time, I let them live that illusion. Maybe because I thought being useful was enough. But being useful isn't the same as being valued. That morning, I brewed myself a cup of coffee and watched the sun rise through the window. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt clarity. They didn't want me? Fine. Then they didn't get the version of me that held them up anymore. I logged into the bank account first. The emergency fund, frozen. The boutique's rent payments, canceled. Let Harper deal with the landlord for once. Then the house note, Patricia's precious retirement nest. I removed my secondary authorization. Let her field the next bank call. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a text. I didn't even log out of the system. I just stopped. Stopped carrying them. Stopped lifting them. Stopped being the backbone they pretended didn't exist. And it felt good. Not out of spite, but out of balance. They had spent years shaping an image, playing house with luxury, and pretending it was all organic, homegrown success. But underneath the surface, it was me holding up the foundation. Me, the man they never wanted. They thought I was quiet because I was weak. But I was quiet because I was calculating. Because when quiet men move, the world doesn't notice until it falls. That day, I went for a walk. No phone, no destination. Just air in my lungs and freedom in my steps. I watched children play in the snow, couples rushing with gifts, strangers helping each other carry boxes to cars. It all felt honest. And I realized, with every step I took away from that world they created, I was getting closer to something more real. More mine. They didn't want me at Christmas? Then they wouldn't get the man who paid for the candles, the food, the heat, and the peace. Let them perform. Let them sparkle. I'd given them a stage for years. Now I was taking the lights with me. The silence didn't echo, it settled. Like snow on rooftops, thick and final. And for the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for Patricia's sharp remarks at the dinner table or Harper's side eyes when I passed the wine. I wasn't preparing my face to smile through another cold joke or filtering my words to avoid being called too intense. I wasn't shrinking. I was, still, present, just for myself. The house was quiet, but my mind wasn't. It buzzed, not with anger, but decisions. Clean, cold, deliberate ones. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee steaming beside me, a yellow legal pad open in front of me. I began making a list. Not of people, not of names. Just actions, quiet exits, calculated departures. Every line I wrote was a string I'd been holding that now needed letting go. Mortgage top-up, canceled. It was the first thing I did. Patricia's home, the big white one with the stone pillars she always bragged about, was kept afloat by two things, her loud pride and my quiet monthly deposits. They thought it was their own frugality. No, it was me. Every time she found an extra $1,000, it was because I had silently deposited it into the joint account I opened in their name under a small LLC, Cypress Renewal. Sounds like a spa brand, right? They never asked what it was. Never cared to know. So I quietly ended it. Family emergency account. Locked. They never once thanked me for it, but they sure loved bragging about it. My wife used to call it our legacy fund whenever guests were around. The reality? I opened it when Patricia's health started to decline and no one else wanted to think long-term. I built it up slowly, redirecting part of my night shift bonuses, never touching it, not even once. That morning, I logged into the platform, changed the email access, and locked withdrawals behind two-factor authentication. No warning. No explanation. Just done. Harper's Boutique's angel investor exited. That one stung a little. Not because I wanted credit, but because I believed in her. When she stood in my living room 3 years ago, crying about her failed Kickstarter campaign, I didn't hesitate. I created a shell investment firm, backed it with my savings, and sent the wire transfer under the name Brinfield Holdings. It was enough to get her out of debt and open the boutique in Midtown. Everyone praised her. Harper's so resilient. She's a genius. Not once did she mention who helped. When I ended that funding, I didn't tell her. I just instructed the firm's proxy to decline the next round. Then I called the leasing office, told them Brinfield Holdings would no longer be guaranteeing her rent. That was all. No rage. No bitterness. Because when a tree withdraws its roots, it doesn't scream. It just stops growing. And the leaves fall. I didn't unfollow anyone. I didn't delete photos or block numbers. I just became invisible. Quiet. In a way they'd never noticed before. Only this time, it wasn't submission. It was subtraction. Every relationship is a system. And for years, I was the invisible backbone, never flashy, never loud, but always there. Holding, balancing, absorbing tension. I didn't ask to be thanked. I didn't want applause. I just wanted respect. But when Harper said, "Don't come for Christmas," and Patricia threatened to pretend I didn't exist, well, I simply gave them what they asked for. My absence. And absence, when it's the thing holding the beams together, isn't silence. It's collapse. I remember walking to the window that afternoon, looking down at the snow-covered sidewalk below. A young boy was helping his little sister make snow angels on the edge of the pavement. They giggled, their jackets puffed out like little balloons. And I wondered, just for a second, what kind of man I might have been if I hadn't been pulled into the orbit of people who only valued shine. What kind of peace I could have had if I hadn't spent the last decade earning the approval of people who thought approval was a currency. I closed the curtain, poured another cup of coffee, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I made a new budget. For me. No hidden accounts for emergencies they'd never thank me for. No side funds to save someone else's pride. Just one account. One card. One man. Then I made a phone call. "Andre," I said, when the young voice answered. "You still looking for a second internship?" It took him a second to place me. "Mr. R." "Yeah. Oh man, I didn't think you'd call. I sent that message months ago. I've got something for you," I said. "It's not glamorous. It's hands-on. But it's real. And you'll learn." He hesitated. "You sure?" "I'm very sure." Because Andre? He was different. He was hungry, humble, and kind. I had met him 2 years ago through a mentoring program. Quiet kid, always carrying an old laptop and fixing things he couldn't afford to replace. He reminded me of me. That call wasn't just about an internship. It was about investment into someone who'd never erase me when things got good. After the call, I leaned back and took a breath. The apartment felt warmer. Not because anything had changed physically, but because something had shifted inside me. A detachment. A letting go of the people who treated me like scaffolding and expected me to disappear once the building looked pretty. Let them keep their polished lies. Let them toast champagne with Grayson and pretend their lives weren't built on the quiet strength of the man they threw away. I didn't need them to know. I just needed me to remember. And I would. Because every gift I'd ever given them, every dollar, every sacrifice, every moment of peace bought with my silence, they would miss it. Not immediately. Not today. But when the pipes froze. When the boutique's landlord came knocking. When Patricia's insurance bounced. When the cracks began to show behind their curated smiles. They'd look around and realize the one man they erased was the one keeping them from falling apart. I didn't expect the quiet to feel this good. Christmas Eve rolled in like a storm wrapped in velvet, quiet, cold, and slow. I stayed in bed later than usual, not because I was tired, but because I could. No obligations. No expectations. No in-laws peeking into the oven or Harper fake smiling while complaining about the centerpiece. It was the first time in years that I wasn't running around trying to make other people's holiday feel whole. I made coffee, black, strong, and let it fill the room with the smell of something real. No cinnamon candles. No expensive scented diffusers. Just coffee and silence. My phone had been silent for 2 days. No text from my wife. No updates from Harper. Not even a sarcastic Merry Christmas from Patricia. They were preparing, no doubt. Prepping for the evening like it was a Broadway show. Harper had been planning this night for weeks. She called it the big reveal the moment she would introduce Grayson Ellison to the family. The billionaire tech mogul. The man who could put her name next to magazine headlines and six-figure wedding fantasies. They wanted everything perfect. Spotless. Patricia probably had her pearls on before breakfast. Harper would have had her makeup artist arrive by noon. I could picture it clearly. Candles lit just right, fireplace roaring even though the heating worked perfectly, violinist by the archway. They'd hired a jazz quartet. I knew because I'd helped them once with the deposit on that quartet, back when it was for someone else's wedding that ended in 3 months. But this year, no one needed me. Or rather, they didn't want me. And so I stayed home. I didn't even turn on the tree lights. They hadn't called to ask why I wasn't coming, which told me they didn't think I'd say no. They believed I'd beg, that I'd press and plead and ask to be let back in, that maybe I'd send a gift anyway, or drop off something sweet for the table, just to show I was still the good guy. But they didn't understand the kind of man I am. I don't need to shout. I just need to stop. And stopping is what I did. I walked past the blinking gifts I had wrapped weeks ago. Still there. Still untouched. A quiet graveyard of effort wasted on people who never said thank you. I didn't scroll through social media, though I knew the posts would be coming in. Harper had likely hired a photographer to capture the evening. She once told me that Christmas wasn't about memories, it was about content. She meant it. Perfect angles. Perfect filters. They didn't just want to impress Grayson, they wanted to curate him. And I didn't fit into the feed. I was too ordinary. Too useful in ways that didn't photograph well. No one posts about the man who fixes the boiler at midnight. The one who pays the light bill quietly or drives you to the airport at 5 a.m. when your ride cancels. I wasn't sleek. I wasn't exciting. I wasn't an aesthetic. I was a foundation. And foundations aren't supposed to be seen. But I was fine with that now. That evening, as the sky turned to indigo and the chill crept through the windows, I cooked a simple dinner for myself. Nothing fancy. Just what I liked. I didn't think once about whether it was enough for someone else. I poured myself a glass of wine. The same one I'd brought for their party. A bottle Patricia once scoffed at for being underwhelming. She liked wine that came with French names and gold foil. Me? I liked wine that tasted like patience. And as I took the first sip, I imagined the performance starting. I could see them in my mind, Harper at the entrance, dressed in something expensive and understated, pretending to be surprised each time a guest complimented her. Patricia offering her signature sugar cookies, the one she bought but always claimed she baked. The fireplace roaring. The lights dimmed to a golden hue. Grayson would arrive last, of course. That's how they timed it. Big entrance. Big moment. They would swarm him. Shake hands. Compliment his shoes. Talk about stocks they didn't understand and brands they couldn't afford. My wife would probably be standing near the piano, pretending to enjoy the music while glancing sideways to check Harper's approval. It was all a performance. And I used to be part of it. Unpaid crew backstage, working lights and lifting scenes while they took their bows. This year, they decided I wasn't needed. So I didn't show up. And somehow, that made me feel bigger, not smaller. I was done being their silent supporting actor. Let them have their spotlight. Let them glitter and glow. But without the man who used to iron their tablecloths at midnight. Without the man who quietly paid the caterer when the card got declined. Without the man who refilled the wine glasses while everyone else told stories they didn't live. They had erased me. Now they would perform without the glue that held their act together. And something deep down told me they'd feel it. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not when the cameras were clicking and the flutes were full. But eventually, when the bills came, when the smiles faded, when the real work had to be done and no one remembered how to lift the weight I always carried. I didn't text my wife. Didn't ask how the evening went. Didn't care if they missed me. Because for the first time, I had no need to be part of something that cost me my peace. I sat back in my chair and looked at the small tree in the corner. Still bare. Still standing. And I smiled. Let the performance begin. Because when the curtains fall, they'll know who was missing. The day after Christmas, the world outside was still wrapped in white. Snow clung to the rooftops, and the streets wore a silence that only winter could deliver. No carols, no laughter, just stillness. It matched my mood perfectly. I hadn't checked my phone since Christmas Eve. Whatever performances they'd staged, I didn't care to watch. My peace, though quiet, was enough. But sometime around noon, my phone buzzed. Once. Then again. A third time. At first, I ignored it. I was halfway through organizing old books, ones I'd promised myself I'd reread when life slowed down. And now it had. But the name that lit up the screen when I finally glanced at it stopped me mid-page. Grayson Ellison. I stared at the name for a full minute, unsure if I was seeing it right. We'd never spoken directly before. He was Harper's prized boyfriend, the one they'd polished the house for, adjusted their personalities for. The man they chose over me. The voicemail icon blinked. I played it. His voice came through, calm but with something beneath it. Thoughtfulness, maybe. Or realization. Hey, man. I know this is unexpected. I didn't get your number from Harper. Andre gave it to me. Said you were his mentor. That alone hit me like a slow breath in cold air. Andre. The quiet kid with the second-hand laptop I'd helped get into a summer tech program. I didn't know they were connected. Grayson continued. I saw your photo at the party. In the hallway. Family portrait stuff. I recognized you instantly. You're the guy who mentored my little cousin through that Harlem program, right? The one who paid his tuition and never took credit. I sat down slowly. My knees felt unsteady. He knew. Yeah, he said, you're that guy. The one who didn't make a scene. Who showed up when it mattered. Who stayed invisible while everyone else soaked up the light. His voice paused, like he was still processing it. So imagine my surprise, he went on, when I heard Harper and Patricia joking about you. Calling you deadweight. A charity case in a suit. Laughing. In front of me. A chill crawled over my skin. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Not anymore. The cruelty wasn't new. The audience was. Grayson's tone hardened just slightly. I left the party. A breath passed through the recording, then a final note. I left her. I don't tolerate cruelty wrapped in Christmas bows. Click. That was it. That was the whole message. Barely a minute long. But it changed everything. I sat there for a while, staring at the phone like it might say more. Like maybe another message would come through with some alternate ending. But there was nothing else. Just the raw truth of what had happened. I got up and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, then leaned against the counter as the weight of it all began to settle. He'd seen a photo. Of me. Of all the things they tried to hide, erase, and rewrite, what shattered their illusion wasn't some dramatic confrontation or viral post. It was a photo. I remembered that photo clearly. It wasn't posed. Just a candid shot from 3 years ago. We were in my backyard, celebrating my wife's graduation. I had grilled for 6 hours while everyone else drank mimosas and took photos. At one point, my niece had grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of me handing a plate to Patricia, laughing about something small and silly. My arm was around Harper's shoulder. Everyone looked happy. It had somehow ended up framed in the hallway at Patricia's house, probably out of convenience or because the lighting looked good. They never thought twice about it. Never considered that the man in the corner of their curated wall might one day cost them their perfect show. And yet, that's exactly what happened. The man they pretended not to know turned out to be the reason their guest of honor walked out the door. I didn't feel triumph. No smug smile crept across my face. What I felt was something deeper, like justice without sound, like a weight finally sliding off my shoulders. They tried to shine by dimming me, but you can't hide a steady light, not forever. Not when it's real. I sat back down and opened my email. Not to write anything, just to stare at the inbox. I knew what would come next. The scrambling, the justifications, the damage control. And sure enough, by evening, the first message came. From Patricia. Subject line, let's talk. No greeting. No apology. Just a line. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Harper is devastated. Can you help us fix this with Grayson? He respects you. He listens to you. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because silence, I've learned, makes people reflect harder than any reply. An hour later, Harper messaged. This time, it was longer. I know things have been weird, and I'm sorry if we made you feel left out. That wasn't the intention. Can we please talk? I think you could help clarify some things with Grayson. Clarify? They wanted me to translate my worth. As if now that it mattered to someone important, it needed to be defined. I put my phone down. I didn't need to respond. My photo had already spoken for me. That night, I lit the tree. Not for Christmas, but for myself. The lights flickered gently, casting soft colors across the walls. I sat beneath it, glass of wine in hand, and felt more peace than I'd known in years. Because sometimes, you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to let the truth sit in a frame long enough for the right person to see it. They tried to erase me. But they forgot. Real character leaves shadows. And shadows show up in photographs. It started with a knock. Not loud. Not urgent. But persistent. The kind of knock that's too rehearsed to sound casual. I was at my desk, organizing some invoices for a clinic in Queens, sipping lukewarm coffee, when I heard it. A slow rhythm. 3 short taps, followed by silence. I didn't need to check the peephole to know who it was. I already felt the shift in the air. I opened the door. There she was. Patricia. Wearing oversized sunglasses even though it was cloudy, clutching a handbag so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind her, a black car idled at the curb, engine humming like it was impatient too. And in the front seat, Harper. Looking anywhere but at me. Her face was pale, but her posture screamed tension, arms folded, eyes locked on a street lamp like it had answers. Patricia tried to smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they're about to ask for something they don't think they deserve. May we come in? She asked, her voice strained and brittle. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I just stood in the doorway, waiting. She cleared her throat. This isn't easy to say, but we need to talk. About Grayson. Of course they did. Now I was useful again. I didn't reply. Just raised an eyebrow and waited. Patricia took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes puffy from what I assumed were either tears or a sleepless night. Harper hasn't slept since Christmas, she said. Grayson blocked her number. Won't return her calls. And her reputation. I said nothing. Because what do you say to people who ignored your presence until it became inconvenient? She continued, as if talking faster would fill the silence I kept giving her. You know he respects you, she said, a little too eagerly now. He mentioned how highly he thinks of you. How you've mentored Andre. How generous you've been. We, Harper especially, had no idea how close you were. I tilted my head slightly. Close? I finally said. Her lips faltered. Well, not close, maybe. But he clearly values you. There it was. Values you. Suddenly, I mattered again. Not because I was family. Not because I was a human being. But because he valued me. And now they were scrambling to borrow that value like a flashlight during a blackout. She stepped closer. If you could just talk to him. Explain that what he overheard was a misunderstanding. We didn't mean any harm. It was a joke. A bad one. She gave a little laugh, sharp and nervous. The kind people make when they're trying to convince themselves, too. Behind her, Harper finally opened the car door. She stepped out slowly, clutching her coat tight around her. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, in the smallest voice I'd ever heard her use, she said, "We messed up." I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the confident woman who used to strut through the house with expensive perfume trailing behind her. I didn't see the smug sister-in-law who once told a family friend I was just a floor nurse, as if that disqualified me from love. I saw someone afraid. Not of me, but of the collapse. Of the illusion they'd built for themselves now catching fire. Patricia kept pushing. Grayson is high profile. People follow his lead. He made one vague post online, and now Harper's lost 2 endorsements. One of her distributors backed out. We need this fixed. There was that word again. They didn't come to apologize. They came to clean up. I exhaled slowly. You called me dead weight, I said quietly. Harper flinched. You said I was a charity case in a suit. Patricia opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. You didn't expect the man in the photo to matter. You didn't even remember the photo was there. Silence. Just the engine humming in the background and the faint sound of wind brushing the trees. Patricia stepped forward again. You've always been good at calming people down. Maybe if you could talk to Grayson, just once, he'd see that we didn't mean anything by it. I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. They didn't get it. They still thought this was about a fix, a patch, a reset. But this wasn't something that could be undone. This wasn't about a single moment. It was about years. Years of being overlooked. Years of showing up, giving quietly, and being made to feel like a shadow at their table. And now they were here, begging for the light they'd once tried to dim. You're not here because you're sorry, I said. You're here because the mask cracked. Patricia's face tightened. Harper stepped forward. I am sorry, she said, voice breaking. I wasn't thinking. We were stupid. We were cruel. But Grayson is everything to me. And you're the reason he walked away. I nodded slowly. For once, the truth felt clean. You're right, I said. I am. She stared at me, like she didn't know what to do with that honesty. So you'll talk to him? Patricia asked, hopeful again. I smiled. Not cruelly. Not smugly. Just peacefully. No, I said. And I stepped back. Then closed the door. Gently. Deliberately. Behind it, the quiet returned. I leaned against it for a second, listening to the stunned silence outside. I could imagine Patricia blinking, Harper frozen mid-step, trying to decide whether to knock again or just walk away. They didn't knock. After a few seconds, I heard the car door close. Then the engine faded down the street. Gone. I walked back to the kitchen, sat down, picked up my mug again. Still warm. I took a sip and smiled to myself. This was what accountability looked like, not shouted in arguments or posted online, but felt in the echo after silence. They'd never heard it before. Never learned how powerful stillness could be when it carried truth. And now, they were learning. Not through fury. Not through revenge. But through absence. I didn't need to lift a hand to destroy them. All I had to do was stop helping them hold up the lie. And now? Now the cracks were showing. I didn't check social media often, but something told me to open the app that morning. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was just the quiet thrill of wondering what happens when people realize the mask they wore so proudly is beginning to slip. The first thing I saw was a post. It wasn't from Harper. It wasn't from Patricia. It was from Grayson. Just a single sentence. No tags, no images, no names. Watch how people treat the ones they think can't give them anything. It tells you everything. That was it. Simple. Elegant. Devastating. No one was mentioned. But everyone in their orbit knew who it was about. Harper's comment section turned off by noon. One of her old sponsors, a luxury home decor brand, issued a vague statement about reevaluating partnerships in light of recent values misalignment. Her boutique's Instagram went from 3 posts a day to total silence. The ripple had begun, and I didn't lift a finger. Grayson didn't say my name. He didn't need to. He just told the truth, his truth. What he saw, what he heard. And the truth had a way of echoing in rooms people thought were soundproof. That single sentence hit harder than any public fallout they feared. Because it didn't attack, it revealed. And nothing scares people more than being seen without their performance. Later that day, I got a message from Andre. Yo, you see Grayson's post? I think he's talking about what happened at the party. People are going wild in the comments. I smiled and typed back. He said what needed to be said. You good. Never better. Because the truth is, I wasn't shaken. I wasn't even surprised. I was still. Solid. Like a tree whose roots had finally stopped feeding ungrateful branches. I went back to my routine that week. Brewed my coffee. Finished the clinic invoices. Walked to the park one afternoon just to feel the winter sun on my face. Life didn't feel heavy anymore. Not because it got easier, but because I had stopped carrying what wasn't mine to hold. That Friday, I got a call from a colleague at the hospital. Hey, she said, trying to sound casual. You might want to know. Harper's father called HR. I paused. He called HR? Why? He said he was concerned about your mental health. Something about emotional instability and asking if we'd noticed any erratic behavior. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Of course, when they can't control the story, they try to rewrite the ending. My voice was calm. Did HR buy it? She laughed. No. We know you. And frankly, we've all seen the party photos. What party photos? The ones Patricia posted. Grayson's in none of them. People noticed. Word gets around. You're not the one looking unstable. I hung up the call and just sat there for a moment. It had begun. Not a scandal. Not a meltdown. But a reckoning. The kind that doesn't come with headlines, but with silence. The kind that empties rooms at networking events and drops email responses from hours to never. People in their world started stepping back, not loudly, but visibly. Because in circles like theirs, image isn't just everything, it's currency. And when someone like Grayson quietly signals that you're not worth being around, the world listens. I didn't gloat. I didn't text Harper. I didn't tell my wife, wherever she was, that I knew what they were going through. Instead, I lit a candle that evening, opened an old notebook I hadn't touched in months, and began to write again. Just thoughts. Reflections. Not about them. About me. Because something had shifted deep inside me since that night they told me not to come. Something I hadn't expected. I began to remember myself. Not the version I trimmed down to be palatable at dinner tables. Not the quiet shadow at family gatherings. Not the helpful hand that never got mentioned in toasts. But the man I used to be. The one who dreamed without needing permission. The one who gave because it was who he was, not because he was trying to earn a seat at someone else's table. That man had gone quiet for a long time. Now he was waking up. The truth wasn't just echoing out there, it was echoing in here, inside me. And as it did, I realized something else. I had always been the one with power. Not because I had money, not because I had influence, but because I showed up over and over, and they depended on that. They built their world on the assumption that I'd never stop giving. But when I stopped, the whole illusion wobbled. And now? Now they weren't just facing public whispers and dropped sponsors. They were facing themselves. That weekend, I ran into an old friend at the bookstore. Someone who used to be in Patricia's circle. She leaned in and said, I heard what happened. Just wanted you to know, people are starting to talk. But not in a bad way. I thanked her. We exchanged numbers again. And as I walked home through the crisp December air, something warmed in my chest. It wasn't pride. It was peace. Because sometimes, the storm doesn't need thunder. Sometimes, it's a quiet shift in wind. And everyone feels it, even if no one talks about it. It came on a Wednesday morning. An email with no subject line. Just my name in the first sentence like we were old friends catching up after a misunderstanding. We've been thinking, maybe we could meet for brunch this Sunday? No apology. No ownership. Just suggestion. As if the last few weeks hadn't happened. As if they hadn't thrown me out of their picture and now wanted to paste me back in because the new frame was falling apart. I scrolled down. They didn't even try to pretend it was about rebuilding a relationship. Halfway through the message, Harper wrote, It would also mean a lot if you could speak to Grayson. Maybe ask him to take down that post? It's hurting more than just our image. It's affecting people's jobs. Their image. Their jobs. Not a word about the years I'd carried them on my back. Not a line about the sacrifices I'd made. Just concern over the fallout. And that was the problem. They didn't want forgiveness. They wanted a reset. As if this was a video game they could restart once the screen glitched. As if I didn't remember every moment they dismissed me. Every time they handed me their coats and their complaints, while smiling at the people they really wanted to impress. I closed the email without responding. And a strange thing happened. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel insulted. I felt free. Because the version of me that would have rushed to keep the peace, that would have agreed to the brunch and played mediator again, that version was gone. Buried beneath the silence they forced on me. And in its place stood someone quieter, clearer, untouchable. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it ring. But when it came again, same number, I answered. It was my father-in-law. The man who once told me, with a smirk and a drink in his hand, "You're not what I expected her to marry, but I guess stability has its perks." He cleared his throat before speaking, like he wasn't used to asking for things. "I think there's been enough drama," he said. "We're all adults here. Maybe it's time to move on." I didn't speak. He went on. "Patricia's having trouble sleeping. Harper's a wreck. Your wife's, well, she's confused. She misses you." I stared at the window, watching a few birds hop along the frost-covered ledge. "I think what we need," he said, "is to just clear the air. One conversation. Get everyone on the same page." I finally spoke. "Which page is that?" He paused. "You know what I mean." But I didn't. Not really. Because the page they were on was never the one I was allowed to write. I said, "Did you know Patricia called my workplace? Tried to get HR to flag me as emotionally unstable?" A beat of silence. Then, defensively, she was just worried. The media thing caught us off guard. You know how she gets when she panics. "Must be hard," I said, voice steady, "when the spotlight hits the wrong person." He didn't reply. I ended the call with a simple, "I'm not interested." Then I turned my phone off for the night. The next morning, they escalated. An email went out to the entire extended family. A message crafted like a PR campaign disguised as family concern. My name in it, carefully framed. "We're worried about him. He hasn't responded. We think he might be isolating. The holidays are hard. Let's keep him in our prayers." Prayers. From people who told me not to come. Who called me dead weight. Who only remembered I existed when someone they wanted was watching me. They wanted to control the narrative. Turn my silence into instability. My peace into a cry for help. It would have been laughable if it weren't so common. That's what people like them do when they lose their grip on someone who used to play along. They don't change. They reframe. But I wasn't angry. I was entertained. Because now they weren't just burning bridges. They were standing on them, striking matches, and wondering why the smoke was rising. A day later, my wife sent me a message directly. No emojis. No sugar. Just words. "I know we've made mistakes. But they're still my family. And I'm caught in the middle." That line. Caught in the middle. As if she hadn't stood beside them at the table. As if she hadn't laughed at their jokes while I stood in the kitchen, clearing plates. As if choosing to stay silent when I was being erased didn't place her on one side. I didn't reply. Because I wasn't caught in anything. I was walking out of it. By Friday, I got a ping from my HR system. Apparently, Patricia had followed up with another concerned citizen email. HR flagged it as potential harassment and asked if I wanted to escalate it formally. I declined. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need help protecting myself anymore. I'd already won. Because the more they flailed, the more they revealed. They couldn't understand how I stayed calm. How I didn't clap back online or throw their secrets into the wind. Because they were still trapped in the performance. And I had walked off the stage. That weekend, I took a train to visit Andre. We had lunch at a quiet diner. He told me about his startup idea, his mother's health, his dreams to build something that helped people, not just impress them. We didn't talk about Harper, or Patricia, or Grayson, because real life was happening, and I had stepped back into it. I watched him talk with light in his eyes, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not bitterness, but relief. Because while they were busy curating perfection, I had found something better, something real, and no brunch or email could ever match that. It was late afternoon when the knock came. Not rushed like someone in a panic. Not hesitant like a neighbor dropping by. Just steady, like the kind of knock that comes from people who believe they still have a right to be let in. I was in the middle of watering my small balcony garden. Nothing fancy, just some herbs, a couple of succulents. The kind of quiet company that grows without asking for applause. I like that about plants. They don't perform. They don't pretend. They thrive or they wither, and either way, they're honest. The knock came again. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked through the apartment, and paused at the door. 3 shadows stood behind the frosted glass. One tall, stiff posture, that had to be her father. The one fidgeting and checking her phone, Harper. And the shorter one in the middle, with a gift bag clutched in both hands, Patricia. Of course. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. They stared at me like I was a stranger who had stolen something from them. Patricia was the first to speak. "Hi," she said, offering that same brittle smile I'd seen 100 times at dinners when the conversation turned uncomfortable. "We didn't want to bother you. Just thought we could drop something off and maybe talk." She lifted the bag slightly, like it was a peace treaty. It was wrapped in gold, the tissue paper puffed up like frosting. I didn't touch it. Behind her, Harper gave a tight nod. Her father cleared his throat, but said nothing. I looked at them. The same 3 who had treated me like wallpaper for years, who had edited me out of their gatherings with the precision of a social media crop tool, who now stood on my doorstep, eyes searching for the man they never bothered to truly see. "We just wanted to make things right," Patricia said. "Right." That word floated between us like perfume. Too sweet, too forced. "You've been ignoring our messages," Harper added. "We figured face-to-face might help." I didn't move, didn't smile, just let them fill the silence. Her father finally stepped forward. He had a card in his hand, one of those premium white ones with raised lettering. He held it like it meant something. "We came to apologize," he said. "You deserved better." It was rehearsed. I could tell. They had probably planned this the way they planned their holiday menus. Every word weighed, every sentence seasoned with just enough regret to sound real. Patricia held out the bag again. "We got you something small. Just a gesture." I glanced at it. A gesture. That's what I'd been to them. A gesture. A role. A quiet fixture in the background that made everything feel stable. Until I stopped. "Please," she whispered, "can we come in?" She said it like it hurt to ask. I looked at them again. 3 people who once told me not to show up, who said they'd pretend they didn't know me, who had laughed while brushing me out of the picture, then panicked when the world noticed what they'd done. They hadn't come to apologize. They'd come to reset, to smooth it over, to stitch the narrative back together before anyone else noticed the tear. But I wasn't a loose thread. I was the fabric, and they'd never known it. "No," I said. Patricia blinked. Harper's lips parted like she wanted to protest, but nothing came out. Her father looked down at the card in his hand, then tucked it back into his coat pocket. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't explain. Didn't justify. Because when people choose to forget your worth, the worst thing you can do is remind them. They'll only remember long enough to use it again. So I kept my peace. Literally. I gently closed the door. Not a slam. Not a statement. Just a closing. A clear boundary. I stood behind it for a few seconds, listening. No footsteps. No yelling. Just silence. Eventually, the sound of heels on concrete. A car door shutting. Then another. And then they were gone. I turned back to my plants, watered the last one, and opened the window. Cool air swept in. Fresh. Honest. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt clean. Because closure doesn't always come with big speeches or dramatic endings. Sometimes, it's just the quiet choice not to let people walk into your space with shoes still muddy from the last time they stepped all over you. Later that night, I opened the gift bag. Curiosity, not sentiment. Inside was a leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. The card read, "For your thoughts. We hope you'll write again." I smiled. Not because it was thoughtful, but because they still didn't get it. I'd never stopped writing. I just stopped writing about them. I threw the card away. Kept the notebook. Because even if the gesture was hollow, the pages were still blank and mine to fill. And this time, I'd write only what mattered. No edits. No pretending. Just truth. It had been 2 weeks since they stood at my door with their gift bag and carefully chosen words. 2 weeks since I told them no. Since I chose not to open the door to the same people who once asked me not to show up at all. And in that time, not much changed on the surface. My apartment was still small. My routines remained the same. I woke up early, brewed my coffee, went to work. I watered my plants, read books. Sometimes I watched old films I'd forgotten I loved. But something inside me had shifted, something permanent. Not anger, not revenge. Just weight. Lifted. There's a certain kind of peace that comes when you stop fighting to be seen by people who've already made up their minds about you. It's not dramatic. It doesn't roar. It just settles. Like quiet snowfall in a forest where no one's watching. I had spent years trying to prove myself to people who were too busy performing their version of perfection to notice the man who swept the stage after they left. And I wasn't blameless. I allowed it, smiled through it, convinced myself that being needed was close enough to being loved, that being useful was enough. But usefulness wears out. Love doesn't. And the difference becomes clearer the day they stop needing you and forget you were ever there. That's the thing about being the invisible backbone. They only feel you when you walk away. I walked into my study and sat at the desk. On the wall above, it was a framed photo, me and Andre on his graduation day. He wore a borrowed cap, grinning like he had just conquered the world. I was in the background, slightly blurred, holding a small bouquet I had picked up on the way. No one asked who bought the flowers. No one tagged me in the photo. But I didn't mind, because I knew the story. And now, so did someone else. Grayson had never reached out again after that voicemail. He didn't need to. That single message had done more for my soul than a decade of forced acceptance from people who couldn't even remember who made the rice at Christmas. He saw me, and not for what I had, or what I gave, or who I stood beside in family photos, but for who I was, the man in the corner, the steady hand, the one who did good without needing to be applauded for it. And somehow, that mattered more than all the dinner parties and performative apologies combined. I pulled out the notebook Patricia had left behind and opened it. The leather was soft, too expensive, trying too hard to impress. But the pages were blank. And blank pages don't lie. I began to write. Not about them. Not about what they did. That chapter was done. I wrote about who I was becoming. A man who could say no without guilt. A man who could look in the mirror without needing someone else's reflection beside him to feel whole. A man who didn't need to prove his worth anymore, because it wasn't up for debate. By noon, the sun peeked through the clouds and spilled across the hardwood floor. I made tea, sat quietly with it. The stillness felt earned now. Not like loneliness, like peace. My phone buzzed once. A message from Andre. Guess who just got approved for his grant? I smiled. Proud of you. Couldn't have done it without you, Mr. R. You believed in me before I did. I didn't reply to that one, because sometimes the best replies are the ones you carry in your chest, not your phone. Later that day, I went for a walk through the park. The trees were bare, but the air was fresh. The kind of cold that wakes you up rather than weighs you down. I passed a bench I used to sit on during my lunch breaks, back when I worked across town. I remembered how I'd eat quietly, text my wife to ask what she wanted for dinner, and head home in time to make something before Patricia dropped by with complaints and condescension. Those days were gone, and I wasn't mourning them. In fact, I pitied them, because they had everything polished on the outside. Pearls, brand deals, curated smiles, but none of them knew what it felt like to be at peace without performance. They needed an audience. I had myself. That was enough. As I walked past a family building a snowman, I felt a wave of warmth. Not jealousy, not sadness. Just appreciation. For the simplicity of it. For the honesty. They weren't posing for likes. They weren't styling the snowman for a photo shoot. They were just living. Present. Laughing. Cold fingers and warm hearts. That used to be me. Before I got swept up in trying to fit into someone else's idea of value. Before I thought love had to be earned in silence. Now I knew better. I walked home slowly. There were still emails I hadn't answered. Still calls I had ignored. But there was no urgency anymore. Because I wasn't waiting for them to see me. They had their chance. They looked past me and paid the price for it. Now they were left with the echo of what they once had and the silence of a door that no longer opened for them. And me? I didn't ruin their Christmas. They did that themselves. I simply chose not to fix it. For once. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't raise your voice, or argue your worth, or demand an apology. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not show up. The Boston summer heat was unbearable, pressing down on our little apartment like a heavy blanket, even though the air conditioning was humming away at full power. I was sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of me, trying to focus on a new client pitch for work. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and I wiped it away with the back of my hand, muttering to myself about how the numbers just weren't adding up. That's when Clara's voice floated in from the kitchen, cutting through the drone of the AC unit. "Liam, your mom texted," she called out, and I didn't even need to ask which mom she meant. It was Judith, my mother-in-law, not my own mother. Judith had a way about her, always polite, always proper, but there was something underneath it all that never quite sat right with me. "She wants us over Sunday to celebrate your birthday," Clara added, and I could hear the strain in her voice, like she was trying to sound cheerful but couldn't quite pull it off. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a long breath, and rubbed my eyes. Another birthday. I'd be turning 36, and honestly, I wasn't much for celebrations anymore. Work had been eating up my time, and all I really wanted was a quiet day with Clara, maybe some takeout, a cold beer, and a movie on the couch. But Judith had other plans, as always. She loved hosting, loved putting on a show, and I knew saying no wasn't really an option. "What did you tell her?" I called back, already guessing the answer. Clara stepped into the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. She gave me a small, tired smile. "I said we'd be there. It's your birthday, Liam," she insisted. I nodded, not surprised. Clara always agreed to these things, even when she didn't want to. She did it for me, and I loved her for it, even if it meant another awkward afternoon with her mom. The truth was, Judith and Clara didn't get along, not really. On the surface, everything was fine. Judith would smile, offer compliments, ask about Clara's freelance design work with that syrupy tone of hers. But I'd seen the way her eyes tightened when Clara talked, the little digs she'd slip into conversations about how Clara must be so busy, or how she didn't understand all that artsy stuff. Clara never said much back, just nodded and kept her cool, but I could tell it got to her. I'd asked her about it once, late at night when we were lying in bed, the city buzzing outside our window. "Does it bother you?" I'd said, my arm draped over her. She'd shrugged, staring up at the ceiling. "It's just how she is. I deal with it." That was Clara, strong, steady, always putting up with more than she should. I pushed the pitch papers aside and stood up, stretching my stiff back. The apartment smelled like the lemon cleaner Clara had used earlier, mixed with the faint heat of the day seeping through the walls. I walked over to the kitchen, where she was rinsing a glass in the sink, her shoulders a little hunched. "You sure you're okay with this?" I asked, leaning against the counter. She glanced at me, her hazel eyes catching the light. "It's fine, Liam. It's one day. We'll go, eat some cake, and come home." She paused, then added with a smirk, "Besides, you know she'd never let me hear the end of it if we skipped." I laughed, a short, dry sound. That was true. Judith had a way of holding on to things, turning them into polite little guilt trips that lingered for weeks. I stepped closer and put my hand on her arm, feeling the warmth of her skin under my fingers. "Thanks," I said quietly. "I know it's not your favorite thing." She turned off the tap and faced me, her smirk softening. "It's your birthday. I'll survive." There was a beat of silence, and then she leaned in and kissed me quick, her lips soft against mine. It was a small moment, but it steadied me. I knew she wasn't thrilled about Sunday, and I wasn't exactly jumping for joy either, but we'd get through it together. That's how we worked. The rest of the afternoon slipped by in a blur. I went back to my pitch, tweaking numbers and rewriting lines until my head ached. Clara disappeared into her little office nook, sketching something on her tablet, her headphones on. Every now and then, I'd glance over at her, watching the way her brow furrowed when she concentrated. She was beautiful like that, focused and in her own world. I thought about Sunday again, Judith's pristine house, the fancy table settings she'd pull out, the way she'd hover over us with that forced smile. It'd be fine, I told myself. Just a few hours. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be as simple as cake and small talk. Judith always had a way of stirring things up, even when she didn't mean to, or maybe especially when she did. By the time evening rolled around, the heat had eased a little, and the apartment felt almost livable again. I ordered us some pizza, and we ate it straight from the box on the couch, laughing about some dumb joke I'd made at work. Clara's laugh was light, and it loosened something in my chest. "You think your mom will have one of those giant cakes again?" she asked, picking a piece of pepperoni off her slice. Probably, I said, grinning. She'll make a big deal out of it, like I'm still turning 10. Clara shook her head, still smiling. She loves that stuff. Yeah, she did. And I guess, in her own way, Judith thought she was doing something nice. I just wished it didn't always feel like there was a catch. The day before the dinner at Judith's, I was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying to unwind from a long week. The apartment was quieter than usual. Clara was out picking up a few things for her latest design project, and the hum of the AC was the only sound keeping me company. The Boston heat hadn't let up, and even with the curtains drawn, I could feel it pressing against the windows. I was just about to get up and grab a beer when the doorbell buzzed, sharp and loud. I frowned, not expecting anyone, and hauled myself off the couch, my bare feet sticking slightly to the hardwood floor as I shuffled to the door. When I opened it, a courier stood there, a young guy in a faded blue uniform, holding a small refrigerated box. Liam Harper? He asked, glancing at his clipboard. Yeah, that's me, I said, confused. He handed me the package, cool to the touch, and a pen to sign for it. I scribbled my name, and he was gone before I could even ask who it was from. I shut the door and turned the box over in my hands. The label caught my eye, Maison Chocolate. My eyebrows shot up. I'd heard of the place, some fancy chocolatier up in New England that charged more for a single truffle than I'd spend on a whole meal. Who'd send me something like this? Clara's key turned in the lock just then, and she stepped inside, arms full of shopping bags. Hey, she said, kicking the door shut behind her. Her eyes landed on the box in my hands, and she tilted her head. What's that? I held it up, still a little stunned. No idea. Just got delivered. It's from Maison Chocolate. She set her bags down on the counter and came over, wiping her hands on her jeans. Judith sent this? She asked, her voice lifting with surprise. I shrugged, peeling off the shipping label to check. Sure enough, there it was, Judith Lancaster, her name and address printed neatly in the sender's spot. Apparently, I said, shaking my head. Guess it's an early birthday thing. Clara raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. That's extravagant, even for her. I couldn't argue with that. Judith loved grand gestures, but this was next level, even for her. I set the box on the coffee table and grabbed a pair of scissors from the kitchen drawer. Let's see what's inside, I said, curiosity tugging at me. Clara leaned in as I cut through the tape, her shoulder brushing mine. The cold air hit us as I lifted the lid, revealing a sleek black velvet box nestled in some kind of fancy foam padding. I popped it open, and there they were, rows of perfect, glossy truffles, each one looking like a little work of art. The smell hit me right away, rich and sweet, like cocoa and something else I couldn't place. Holy crap, I muttered, picking up the card tucked inside. It was Judith's handwriting, all loops and flourishes, impossible to mistake. Specially selected just for you, it read, signed with her usual dramatic J. I held it up for Clara to see, and she scanned it, her lips pressing into that tight little smile she always got around her mom's stuff. She went all out, she said, her tone flat. I nodded, setting the card down. Yeah, guess she really wants to make this birthday a big deal. Clara didn't say anything else, just gave me that look. Half amused, half something I couldn't read, and turned back to unpack her bags. I sat there for a minute, staring at the truffles. They looked too good to be real, almost too pretty to eat. Part of me wanted to crack one open right then and there, but I figured I'd save them for later, maybe after dinner or something. You want one? I asked Clara, holding the box out as she shoved a sketchbook into her bag. She glanced over her shoulder and shook her head. Nah, I'm good. Those are yours. There was a little edge to her voice, nothing big, but enough that I noticed. I let it go, though. Clara wasn't big on sweets anyway, and I didn't want to push. The rest of the day went by slow and easy. Clara disappeared into her office nook to work, and I flipped on the TV, half watching some home improvement show while my mind wandered. The chocolate box sat there on the table, pulling my attention every few minutes. I kept thinking about Judith, why she'd sent something so fancy, so out of the blue. She'd always been nice to me, maybe too nice sometimes, like she was trying to prove something. I figured it was just her way of keeping things smooth, especially with how rocky things got between her and Clara. Still, it felt off. Too much, somehow. By the time evening rolled around, Clara came out of her office, stretching her arms over her head. I'm beat, she said, yawning. Think I'll call it a night soon. I nodded, glancing at the clock, barely past 8. You okay? I asked, sitting up a little. She waved me off. Just a long day. Deadlines. I watched her shuffle toward the bedroom, her socks whispering against the floor, and felt a pang of guilt. She'd been pushing herself hard lately, and here I was, lounging around with a box of overpriced chocolates I didn't even ask for. After she disappeared behind the bedroom door, I leaned back and stared at the box again. The house was quiet now, just the low hum of the TV and the occasional car horn outside. I told myself I'd wait, maybe bring the truffles to Judith's tomorrow to share. It'd be a nice gesture, right? Show some appreciation. But the more I looked at them, the more I wondered what they tasted like. Just one couldn't hurt, I thought. Clara wouldn't care, and Judith wouldn't know. I reached for the box, my fingers brushing the velvet, and hesitated. Something about it felt like a decision, though I couldn't say why. In the end, I pulled my hand back and flipped the channel instead. They could wait. For now, at least, I'd let them sit there, a little mystery wrapped in black velvet, courtesy of my ever-gracious mother-in-law. That night, after Clara went to bed, the apartment felt too still, like the air itself was holding its breath. She'd had a rough day, her design clients were piling on revisions, and I could see the exhaustion in the way she dragged herself to the bedroom, barely saying goodnight. I stayed up, sprawled on the couch, the TV flickering with a baseball rerun I wasn't really watching. The Red Sox were losing, as usual, and the announcer's voice droned on about missed chances. My mind wasn't on the game, though. It kept drifting to that black velvet box sitting on the coffee table, the one Judith had sent. Those truffles were calling to me, and I couldn't shake the itch to find out what made them so special. I tried to ignore it at first. I got up, grabbed a glass of water from the kitchen, and paced around a little, the floor cool under my feet. The apartment smelled faintly of Clara's lavender candle, the one she'd lit earlier to unwind, but it wasn't enough to distract me. Every time I sat back down, my eyes landed on that box. It was just sitting there, all fancy and untouched, like it was daring me to do something about it. Specially selected just for you, Judith's note had said. I snorted to myself. She probably spent a fortune on them, and here I was, letting them go to waste. What was the harm in trying one? I reached for the box, my fingers brushing the soft velvet, and flipped it open. The smell hit me again, deep, rich cocoa, with a hint of something sharp, maybe hazelnut or coffee. The truffles gleamed under the dim light of the lamp, each one perfect, like little jewels. I picked one up, rolling it between my fingers. It was cool, smooth, almost too pretty to eat. But my stomach growled, and my curiosity won out. I popped it into my mouth and bit down. The shell cracked, and the inside melted across my tongue, silky, sweet, with a kick of something bitter that made my eyes widen. Holy crap, that was good. Better than good. It was the best chocolate I'd ever tasted, hands down. One wasn't enough. I grabbed another, then another, savoring the way they melted, the flavors shifting with each bite. Dark cocoa, a hint of caramel, something fruity I couldn't name. Before I knew it, I was halfway through the box, crumbs dusting my shirt, my fingers sticky. I leaned back, grinning like an idiot, the game forgotten. Judith, you outdid yourself, I muttered, wiping my hands on my jeans. I didn't even feel guilty. Clara didn't want any earlier, she'd said so herself, and these were mine, right? A birthday gift. I deserved this after the week I'd had. The box was looking pretty empty now, and I paused, staring at the last few truffles. Maybe I should save some, I thought. Bring them to Judith's tomorrow, show her I appreciated it. But then I pictured her face, that smug little smile she'd get, like she'd won something by impressing me. Nah, I decided. These were too good to share. I popped another one in my mouth, closing my eyes as it melted, and let out a contented sigh. The TV buzzed on, the crowd cheering faintly, but I was in my own world now, lost in the taste of it all. By the time I finished the last one, the box was a mess of crumpled wrappers and smudged velvet. I sat there, staring at it, a little stunned. Whoops, I said out loud, my voice cutting through the quiet. I'd eaten the whole damn thing. Every single truffle. My stomach felt heavy, but I couldn't bring myself to care. It wasn't like Clara would mind. She'd probably laugh if she saw me like this, covered in chocolate crumbs like a kid who'd raided the candy jar. I brushed off my shirt, tossed the empty box onto the table, and leaned back, feeling full and smug and a little ridiculous. The game ended, Red Sox lost, big surprise, and I flipped off the TV, the room going dark except for the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I should have gone to bed, but I didn't move. My mind kept replaying the taste of those truffles, the way they'd surprised me with every bite. Judith had picked a winner, I give her that. I wondered how much they'd cost, probably more than I'd ever spend on myself. It was a nice thought, her going out of her way like that. Made me feel a little warm, like maybe she really did care, even if she and Clara didn't see eye to eye. I stretched out on the couch, my head resting on the armrest, and stared up at the ceiling. The apartment was silent now, just the faint hum of the AC and the occasional creak of the building settling. Clara was probably fast asleep, her breathing soft, and even in the next room. I pictured her waking up tomorrow, finding the empty box, and shaking her head at me. "You ate them all?" she'd say, her voice teasing. I'd shrug, grin, tell her they were too good to resist. She'd roll her eyes, but she wouldn't be mad. That was the thing about Clara. She let me have my moments, even the dumb ones. Eventually, I hauled myself up, my legs heavy, and shuffled to the kitchen to toss the wrappers in the trash. The box I left on the table, evidence of my little binge. I didn't feel bad, though. It was my birthday gift, my night, my indulgence. I brushed my teeth, the mint cutting through the lingering sweetness, and climbed into bed next to Clara. She didn't stir, her back to me, her hair spilling across the pillow. I lay there for a while, staring at the shadows on the wall, my stomach full and my mind buzzing. Those truffles were something else. I drifted off thinking about them, the taste still on my tongue, wondering if Judith had any idea how much I'd enjoyed her surprise. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing, the rich, dark scent pulling me out of a heavy sleep. My head felt fuzzy, and my stomach was still full from last night's chocolate binge, but I couldn't complain. It was Sunday, my birthday, and for once, I didn't have to rush out the door to work. I rolled over, blinking at the sunlight sneaking through the blinds, and saw Clara's side of the bed empty. She was already up, probably in the kitchen. I stretched, my joints popping, and hauled myself out of bed, tugging on a t-shirt as I shuffled out to join her. She was standing by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs, her hair still messy from sleep. "Morning," I said, my voice rough. She glanced over with a small smile. "Happy birthday, old man." I grinned, leaning against the doorway. "Thanks. Smells good in here." She slid a mug my way, and I took it, wrapping my hands around the warmth. The apartment was quiet, the city outside just starting to hum with Sunday traffic. I sipped the coffee, black, strong, exactly how I liked it, and felt the fog in my head start to clear. "Sleep okay?" I asked, watching her stir sugar into her own cup. She nodded. "Yeah, you." "Like a rock," I said, which was true, though I didn't mention the truffles probably had something to do with it. We sat at the table, sipping in comfortable silence, the empty chocolate box still sitting on the coffee table in the next room. I kept waiting for her to notice, to say something, but she didn't. Maybe she hadn't seen it yet. I wasn't worried, though she'd laugh when she found out. My phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the quiet, and I groaned. "Who's that at this hour?" I muttered, getting up to check. The screen lit up with Judith's name. Of course. I swiped to answer, putting it on speaker so Clara could hear. "Happy birthday, Liam." Judith's voice came through, bright and syrupy, the way it always was when she wanted to sound cheerful. "Hey, Judith." "Thanks," I said, leaning against the counter. "Did the chocolates arrive?" she asked, and I could picture her sitting in her pristine kitchen, probably sipping tea from one of those fancy cups she loved. "They did," I said, glancing at Clara. She raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe I just wanted to mess with Judith a little, but I added, "Clara ate them all." There was a long pause on the other end, so quiet I thought the call dropped. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What?" she mouthed, but I just grinned and shrugged. Then Judith's voice came back, shaky, almost trembling. "What? Are you serious?" Before I could laugh it off or tell her I was kidding, the line went dead. She'd hung up. I stared at the phone, confused. "That was weird," I said, setting it down. Clara was still looking at me, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her mouth. "Why'd you say that?" she asked, her voice sharp. I scratched the back of my neck. "Sutta?" "I don't know. Thought it'd be funny." "She didn't take it well, huh?" Clara didn't laugh. She set her mug down hard enough that a little coffee sloshed over the side. "Liam, that's not like her." She sounded off. I frowned, replaying the call in my head. Judith did sound strange, but I figured she was just annoyed I'd ruined her big gesture. "She's fine," I said, waving it off. Probably mad I didn't gush about how great they were. But then my phone buzzed again this time. It was Clara's name on the screen. I picked it up, confused. "You're right here," I said, showing her. She grabbed her own phone from her pocket, frowning. "I didn't call you." I answered anyway. "Hello." Clara's voice came through, breathless, panicked. Liam, what did you tell my mom? I blinked, looking at the Clara sitting across from me, who was just as confused as I was. That you ate the chocolates, I said slowly. Why? There was a pause, then her voice again, quieter. Liam, something's wrong. The call cut out. I set the phone down, my heart starting to thud. Clara, the real Clara, the one in front of me, stood up, her face pale. What the hell was that? She asked, her voice shaking. I don't know, I said, my mouth dry. That was your voice, but you didn't call me. We stared at each other, the air in the room feeling heavier than it had a minute ago. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was it a prank? A glitch? But Judith's reaction, that tremble in her tone, it stuck with me. Call her back, I said, nodding at Clara's phone. She dialed, her fingers trembling, but it went straight to voicemail. She's not picking up, Clara said, her eyes locked on mine. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Okay, let's not freak out. Maybe she's just, I don't know, upset about the chocolates. It's Judith, she overreacts. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Something was off, and I could feel it in my gut, a cold twist that had nothing to do with the coffee. Clara shook her head. No, Liam. That call, my voice, it wasn't me. And Mom sounded scared, not mad. She was right. I replayed Judith's words, the way her voice cracked. This wasn't about me teasing her. This was something else. I walked over to the coffee table, grabbed the empty chocolate box, and turned it over in my hands. The velvet was smudged, the wrapper's gone, but the label was still there, Maison Chocolate, Judith's name, her address. Maybe it's nothing, I said, more to myself than to Clara. Maybe she's just being dramatic. But Clara didn't answer. She was staring at her phone, her knuckles wide around it. Liam, she said quietly, what if it's not nothing? I didn't have an answer for that. All I knew was the morning had started out normal, coffee, a lazy Sunday, my birthday, and now it felt like something was unraveling, something I couldn't quite see yet. Clara came home early that afternoon, and the second I saw her face, I knew something was seriously wrong. She burst through the door, her keys clattering onto the counter, her skin pale like she'd seen a ghost. I was on the couch, still shaken from that weird phone call earlier, my half-finished coffee cold on the table. Liam, she said, her voice trembling as she dropped her bag by the door. My mom just called me. I sat up, my stomach tightening. What did she say? Clara crossed the room and sank into the chair across from me, her hands twisting together. She sounded terrified. Kept asking if I was okay, if I'd eaten anything strange. Then she just hung up. I stared at her, trying to process it. Judith, terrified? That didn't fit. She was always so put together, so in control. Even when she was annoyed, she'd mask it with that polite smile of hers. Wait, slow down, I said, leaning forward. This is about the chocolates, isn't it? What I told her this morning. Clara nodded, her eyes wide. I think so. She wouldn't say much, just kept repeating. You didn't eat them, did you? Like it was life or death. My chest felt tight, and I rubbed my face, trying to shake off the growing unease. I don't get it. I ate them, not you. Why is she freaking out about you? That's when it hit me, not like a thought, but like a punch to the gut. My stomach twisted, sharp and sudden, and it wasn't just nerves. A cold sweat broke out across my back, soaking through my shirt, and I gripped the arm of the couch to steady myself. Liam. Clara's voice cut through the haze, sharp with worry. She was on her feet now, crossing to me. You okay? I tried to answer, but the room tilted, the edges blurring. I don't feel right, I managed, my words slurring. Her hands were on my shoulders, cool against my clammy skin. Sit back, she said, pushing me gently into the cushions. But sitting didn't help. The nausea came fast, a wave so strong I doubled over, clutching my stomach. Oh my God, Liam, Clara gasped, kneeling in front of me. I could barely focus on her face. Everything was spinning, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. I'm calling 911, she said, scrambling for her phone. I wanted to tell her no, that I'd be fine, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth tasted bitter, metallic, and the pain in my gut was like nothing I'd ever felt, sharp, burning, relentless. I slumped sideways, my head hitting the armrest, and Clara's voice faded in and out as she shouted into the phone. Yes, my husband, he's sick, really sick, please hurry. The next few minutes were a blur. I kept slipping, my mind foggy 1 second, sharp the next. Clara stayed with me, her hand gripping mine, her voice shaking as she tried to keep me awake. Liam, stay with me, okay? They're coming. Just hold on. I nodded, or thought I did, but my body wasn't listening. My vision tunneled, the apartment shrinking to a pinprick of light, and all I could think about was those damn chocolates. What was in them? That question looped in my head over and over as the nausea surged again. I barely made it to the edge of the couch before I threw up, a violent heave that left me gasping, my throat raw. The paramedics arrived fast, boots thudding, voices loud and clipped. What happened? One of them asked, a guy with a buzz cut and a stethoscope around his neck. Clara's words tumbled out, frantic. He ate some chocolates last night, a whole box. Then he started feeling sick just now. Please help him. They moved me onto a stretcher, my limbs heavy and useless, and I caught a glimpse of Clara's face. White, terrified, tears streaking her cheeks. I'm coming with you, she told them, grabbing her bag, and they didn't argue. The ambulance ride was hell. The sirens wailed, lights flashing through the windows, and I lay there, strapped down, an oxygen mask pressed over my face. The paramedic beside me kept asking questions. When did I eat them? How many? How I felt. But my answers were mumbles, half-formed. My stomach churned, my head pounded, and that cold sweat wouldn't stop. Clara sat near my feet, her hand on my leg, squeezing tight. You're gonna be okay, she kept saying, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I wanted to believe her, but that question kept clawing at me. What was in those chocolates? At the hospital, they wheeled me straight into the ER, the lights blinding, the noise overwhelming. Doctors and nurses swarmed, hooking me up to machines, sticking in my arm. I faded in and out, catching snippets. Clara's voice, a doctor saying something about stabilizing him. The beep of a monitor. When I came to again, I was in a bed, the room quieter, Clara beside me. My stomach still ached, but the nausea had eased, and my head wasn't spinning anymore. Hey, I croaked, my throat dry. She grabbed my hand, her eyes red. Hey, you scared the hell out of me. What happened? I asked, my voice weak. She swallowed hard. They don't know yet. They're running tests. Said it's not normal food poisoning, something worse. Worse. That word sank in, heavy and cold. I thought about the chocolates, the way I'd eaten every last one, how good they'd tasted. And Judith's call, her panic when I said Clara ate them. Clara, I said, forcing the words out. Your mom, she knew something. Her face hardened, her jaw tight. Yeah, I think so too. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, the four cold in my arm. The pieces didn't fit yet, but they were starting to line up. Judith sent those chocolates for me, or so I'd thought. But her reaction, her fear, the way she'd asked about Clara, it didn't make sense. Unless they weren't meant for me. Unless something in that box was never supposed to be a gift. My head throbbed, my body weak, but my mind wouldn't stop. What was in those chocolates? I didn't have an answer, but lying there, hooked up to tubes, one thing was clear. Whatever it was, it had almost taken me down, and maybe it still could. The hospital room was cold, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones no matter how many blankets they pile on you. I lay there, hooked up to N4, the steady drip of fluid keeping me tethered to reality. My stomach still ached, a dull throb that reminded me of last night's chocolates with every breath, but the nausea had finally backed off. Clara sat beside me, her chair pulled close to the bed, her hand resting on mine. She hadn't said much since the doctor left, just kept staring at the floor, her lips pressed tight. I could tell her mind was racing, mine was too. Whatever happened yesterday wasn't an accident, and we both knew it, even if we didn't have the proof yet. A young doctor came in not long after, his white coat crisp, his face serious but not unfriendly. He flipped through a chart, his eyes scanning the pages, then looked up at Clara. We've got some preliminary results, he said, his voice calm but firm. Your husband's showing signs of toxic ingestion. Not typical food poisoning, something more specific. We're running more tests to narrow it down. Toxic ingestion. The words hit me like a brick. I glanced at Clara, and her face went even paler, if that was possible. Toxic, she repeated, her voice small. Like poison? The doctor nodded, cautious. It's possible. We'll know more soon. For now, he's stable, but we need to keep him here. I swallowed, my throat dry despite the four. Poison. That couldn't be right. Those chocolates were from Judith, fancy, expensive, sure. But poison? My head spun, and not just from whatever was in my system. Clara squeezed my hand, her fingers trembling. He ate a box of chocolates last night, she told the doctor. A gift from my mom. Could that be it? The doctor's brow furrowed, and he jotted something down. Could be. Do you still have the packaging? Clara shook her head. I looked when we got home earlier. It's gone. I don't know where it went. I frowned, trying to think back. I'd left the empty box on the coffee table, hadn't I? But I couldn't be sure. Everything after last night was a blur. The doctor left after that, promising updates, and the room fell quiet again. I stared at the ceiling, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Clara, I said, my voice raspy, this doesn't make sense. Why would your mom send me poisoned chocolates? She didn't answer right away, just kept rubbing her thumb over my knuckles, her eyes distant. I don't know, she said finally. But her call today, she was scared, Liam. Like she thought I'd eaten them. That hit me again, Judith's panic when I'd lied and said Clara had the chocolates. It wasn't annoyance or disappointment. It was fear. Real fear. Before I could say anything else, a new voice broke the silence, a deep, steady tone from the doorway. Mr. Harper? Mrs. Harper. We both looked up. A man stood there, mid-40s maybe, wearing a plain gray suit and a badge clipped to his belt. I'm Detective Eli Moreno, he said, stepping inside. Mind if I ask you a few questions? Clara nodded, sitting up straighter, and I managed a week. Sure. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, his dark eyes sharp but not unkind. Hospital called us in, he explained. Suspected poisoning's not something we take lightly. Can you tell me what happened? Clara took the lead, her voice steadier now. She told him about the chocolates, how they'd come from Judith, how I'd eaten them all, how I'd collapsed earlier. Moreno listened, scribbling notes, his face unreadable. Anything unusual about the delivery? He asked. Clara shook her head. It was just a courier. Normal package, refrigerated. Fancy label. He nodded, then turned to me. You feel anything odd before today? After eating them? I thought about it. My head's still foggy. Not really. They were good, great, even. Didn't feel sick till this morning. He wrote that down too, then asked, and the packaging's missing? Yeah, Clara said. I couldn't find it. Moreno tapped his pen against the notebook, thinking. Okay, we'll need to track down that chocolatier, see what they say. Anything else stand out to you? I hesitated, then said, Judith, my mother-in-law, she called this morning. Freaked out when I said Clara ate the chocolates. I was kidding, but she didn't take it like a joke. His eyes sharpened at that, and he made another note. Interesting. We'll follow up with her too. He flipped the notebook shut and slipped it back into his pocket. Rest up, Mr. Harper. We'll figure this out. He gave Clara a nod and left, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The room felt heavier after he was gone. Clara let out a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping. Poison, Liam, she whispered. This is insane. I squeezed her hand back, my mind churning. Yeah, but why? Why me? She didn't have an answer, and neither did I. Then a memory flickered, something I hadn't thought about till now. Wait, I said, sitting up a little, wincing at the pull of the four. Naomi was over last week. Clara's head snapped up. My sister. I nodded. Yeah, she stopped by, remember? Said she was in the neighborhood. Was in and out quick. Clara's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. She didn't say much. Just asked about work, hung out for a bit. I thought back to it. Naomi in her living room, her usual chatter, nothing out of the ordinary. But the timing stuck with me now. You think she could have. I didn't finish, but Clara got it. I don't know, she said, her voice hard. But it's weird, right? Her showing up. Then this? I nodded, the pieces clicking in a way I didn't like. Naomi and Judith were close, closer than Clara was with either of them. If something was up, could she be part of it? I lay back, exhausted, my body weak but my mind racing. The chocolates, Judith's call, Naomi's visit, it was all too much to be coincidence. Clara, I said, my voice low, we need to know what's going on. Really know. She nodded, her face set. I'll check the security cam when I get home. The one in the hall. Maybe it caught something. I managed a small smile, grateful for her. Good idea. She squeezed my hand again, her grip firm. We'll figure this out, Liam. I promise. I believed her. Whatever was in those chocolates, whatever Judith, and maybe Naomi, had planned, we weren't letting it go. Not now. Not after this. The hospital room was starting to feel like a cage, the white walls closing in as the hours dragged on. I lay there, still weak, the four-line tugging at my arm every time I shifted. The machines beeped steadily, a rhythm I couldn't escape, and my head ached from trying to piece everything together. Clara had been by my side most of the day, but I convinced her to go home and check the security camera footage from our hallway. We needed answers, something concrete, and that little cam was our best shot. She'd hesitated, her eyes worried, but I'd squeezed her hand and said, "I'm fine. Go. We need to know." She'd nodded, kissed my forehead, and left, promising to be back soon. I was alone now, staring at the ceiling, my mind stuck on Judith and Naomi. The doctor's words, toxic ingestion, kept echoing, and I couldn't shake the image of that chocolate box, all velvet and promise, sitting on our coffee table. I'd eaten every last one, thinking it was just a fancy gift, and now here I was, hooked up to tubes, fighting off whatever they'd done to me. Poison. The words still didn't feel real. Why would Judith send me poison? Or was it even meant for me? Her panic when I'd said Clara ate them, it gnawed at me, a puzzle piece that didn't fit yet. The door creaked open, pulling me out of my thoughts, but it was just a nurse checking my chart. She adjusted something on the floor, gave me a quick smile, and left without a word. I sighed, shifting to get comfortable, though my body still felt like it had been run over. That's when I heard voices, low, muffled, coming from the corridor outside the waiting room nearby. I couldn't make out much at first, just the hum of conversation, but then one voice sharpened, familiar and tense. "Naomi." My breath caught, and I strained to listen, my heart thudding against my ribs. "He wasn't supposed to eat them all," she whispered, her tone urgent, almost pleading. My stomach dropped. I held my breath, waiting, and then Judith's voice cut through, sharp and hissed. "Be quiet. Don't say another word." The words hit me like a slap, clear as day even through the wall. I froze, my mind racing to catch up. He wasn't supposed to eat them all. Me. They were talking about me. And those chocolates. My hands clenched the thin hospital blanket, knuckles white. This wasn't a mistake or a bad batch from the chocolatier. They'd meant to do this, but not to me. The way Judith freaked out about Clara, it clicked, cold and ugly. They'd wanted Clara to eat them. I lay there, stunned, my chest tight. Poison wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was real, and it had a target. Clara. My wife. The woman sitting by my bed all day, terrified for me, had been the one they were after. Why? What could Judith and Naomi possibly gain from hurting her? My head spun, anger boiling up alongside the confusion. I wanted to rip the four out, storm out there, and demand answers, but my body wouldn't let me. I was stuck, helpless, listening as their voices faded, their footsteps retreating down the hall. The door opened again a while later, Clara this time, her face pale and set, like she'd seen something she couldn't unsee. She didn't even sit, just stood there, gripping her phone. "Liam," she said, her voice low. I heard them. I nodded, my throat tight. "Me too. Naomi and your mom," outside the waiting room. Her eyes widened, and she stepped closer, her hands shaking. "What did they say?" I swallowed, forcing the words out. "Naomi said I wasn't supposed to eat them all." Judith told her to shut up. Clara's breath hitched, and she sank into the chair, her phone slipping onto the bed. "Oh my God," she whispered. They tried to poison me." I reached for her hand, my own trembling from weakness and rage. "Yeah," I said, my voice rough. "That's what it sounds like." She stared at me, her hazel eyes glassy with tears she wouldn't let fall. Why? Why would they do this? I shook my head, as lost as she was. "I don't know. But they messed up. I ate them instead." She let out a shaky laugh, bitter and broken. "You saved me by being a pig." I tried to smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Guess so." She picked up her phone, her jaw tightening. The camera footage, I checked it. Nothing weird with the delivery, just the courier dropping it off. "But the box, it's gone, Liam. I left it on the table this morning, and now it's not there." My mind flashed to Naomi's visit last week. "Someone took it," I said. "Maybe Naomi, maybe Judith." Covering their tracks. Clara nodded, her face hardening. "They're not getting away with this." I called Detective Moreno on the way back. "He's meeting me at the house tomorrow to look closer." "Good," I said, my voice firm despite how tired I felt. "We've got proof now. They slipped up, talking where you could hear." "Moreno'll nail them." Clara squeezed my hand, her grip fierce. "I hope so. I can't believe this, Liam." My own mom, my sister, her voice cracked, and I pulled her closer, resting my forehead against hers. "We'll get through it," I said, meaning every word. "They don't get to win." She stayed like that for a while, her breathing steadying against mine, and I held on to her, the only solid thing in this mess. My body ached, my head throbbed, but the anger kept me sharp. Judith and Naomi had tried to take Clara from me. Whether it was jealousy, money, or something else, I didn't care. They'd failed, and now they'd pay. I thought about those chocolates again, how I'd eaten everyone, oblivious to what they were. If I hadn't, Clara might be the one in this bed, or worse. The thought made my stomach turn, but it also lit a fire in me. Whatever their plan was, it was over. We'd make sure of it. The hospital discharged me the next day, but I still felt like a shadow of myself, weak, shaky, like my body wasn't fully mine yet. Clara drove us home, her hands tied on the wheel, her eyes flicking to me every few minutes like she was scared I'd collapse again. I didn't blame her. The doctors had stabilized me, said the worst was over, but they still didn't have a full answer on what was in those chocolates. We'll know more when the lab results come back, they told us, and that was that. For now, I was just glad to be out of that sterile room, away from the beeping machines and the smell of antiseptic. But going home didn't feel safe anymore, not after what we'd heard. Clara had called Detective Moreno that morning, and he'd agreed to meet us at the house with a team to search Judith's place. She barely slept. I could tell, dark circles under her eyes, her movements sharp and restless. "We're ending this today," she'd said as we pulled into our parking spot, her voice hard. I nodded, leaning back in the seat, my head still fuzzy. "Yeah, they're not getting away with it." She reached over and squeezed my hand, a quick, fierce grip, then got out to help me inside. I hated needing the help, but my legs wobbled, and I let her steady me up the stairs to our apartment. Detective Moreno was already there, waiting outside our door with another officer, a woman in uniform who nodded at us as we approached. "Mr. Harper, Mrs. Harper," Moreno said, his gray suit a little wrinkled today. "How you holding up?" I shrugged, leaning against the wall. "Been better. Ready to figure this out, though." He gave a short nod, his dark eye steady. "Good. We've got a warrant for your mother-in-law's house. Team's heading there now. I'll go with you to check it out after we're done here." Clara unlocked the door, her hands steady despite everything. "Let's do it," she said, and we followed her inside. The apartment looked the same, coffee mugs still on the table, my work papers scattered, but it felt different, like someone had been here. Clara went straight to the coffee table, where the chocolate box used to be. "It's gone," she said, turning to Moreno. "I told you, it was right here yesterday morning." He nodded, pulling out his notebook. "You're sure no one else has been in?" I thought about it, my mind sluggish. "Not that I know of. Just us, and Naomi last week." Moreno's pen paused. "Your sister?" Clara nodded. "Yeah, she stopped by. Timing's suspicious, right?" He wrote that down, his face unreadable. "We'll ask her about it." He and the officer poked around for a bit, checking the trash, the kitchen, even the hallway cam footage Clara had saved on her laptop. Nothing new showed up, just the courier dropping off the package like she'd said. Moreno rubbed his jaw, thinking, "All right, let's head to Judith's. If there's anything to find, it'll be there." Clara grabbed her bag, and I forced myself to stand straighter, ignoring the ache in my legs. "I'm coming too," I said. Clara frowned. "Liam, you should rest." "No." I cut in, my voice firmer than I felt. "I need to see this through." She didn't argue, just nodded, and we piled into Moreno's unmarked car, the officer following in her own. Judith's house was a half-hour drive, a big, pristine place in the suburbs with a manicured lawn and white shutters. It always looked like something out of a magazine, too perfect to be real. When we got there, another police car was already parked out front, and 2 officers were waiting by the door. Judith and Naomi were at the station. Moreno had made sure of that, getting them brought in for questioning after Clara's call. The house was empty, quiet, and it gave me the creeps knowing what we were looking for. Moreno led the way inside, warrant in hand, and we started searching. The place smelled like lavender and lemon polish, everything spotless, Judith style. Clara went straight for the study, a small room off the living area where her mom kept her desk. I followed, my steps slow, leaning on the wall for support. "If she hid anything, it'd be here," Clara said, pulling open drawers. I watched her rummage through papers, her hands shaking slightly, and then she froze. "Liam," she whispered, holding up a stack of documents. I shuffled over, peering over her shoulder. Fake health insurance forms, Clara's name on them, listing Judith and Naomi as beneficiaries. My stomach turned. What the hell? She kept digging, her movements frantic now, and pulled out a printout. Web searches on toxins, arsenic highlighted in yellow. Then, in a locked drawer she pried open with a letter opener, she found the worst of it. A draft of a revised life insurance policy, cutting me out entirely, and a second one in my name, my signature forged, dated just last month. Clara's hands shook as she handed them to Moreno, who'd come up behind us. "This is it," she said, her voice breaking. "They were planning this." Moreno scanned the papers, his jaw tight. Motive and evidence. Strong case. He bagged everything, and within hours, Judith and Naomi were arrested, Judith for attempted murder, Naomi as an accessory. Moreno told us later they'd cracked under questioning, Naomi spilling first, claiming it was all Judith's idea. The chocolates were laced with arsenic, meant for Clara, a slow dose to make it look like illness. They'd underestimated me eating them all, throwing their plan off. I sat there, listening to Moreno, my head reeling. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law had tried to kill my wife for money, control, whatever twisted reason they'd cooked up. And I'd stumbled into it, nearly dying instead. Clara didn't cry, not then. She just held my hand as we left Judith's house, the evidence in police hands, the truth laid bare. "It's over," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the hell we'd been through. I nodded, pulling her close. "Yeah, they're done." And as we drove back, the weight of it settled, not just the betrayal, but the fact that we'd survived it. Together. The trial came fast, just a couple of months after that day at Judith's house, but it felt like years had crawled by. I was out of the hospital by then, back on my feet, though I'd dropped some weight and still got tired too quick. The doctors had finally pinned down the arsenic in those chocolates, enough to kill if I'd been smaller or weaker, they said. Lucky me, I guess. Clara and I had spent those months in a weird limbo, trying to live normal while the case built up. Work, dinner, sleep, routine kept us sane, but the shadow of what Judith and Naomi did hung over everything. We didn't talk about it much, just held on to each other tighter, like that was enough. Court was brutal. I sat in the gallery with Clara every day, my hand in hers, watching Judith try to spin it all into something it wasn't. She took the stand in her pressed blouse and pearls, looking every bit the gracious mother-in-law I'd once thought she was. "It was a misunderstanding," she said, her voice soft, eyes glistening with fake tears. "A birthday prank gone wrong. I never meant harm." A prank. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt, remembering the hospital bed, the IVs, the way my body had turned against me. Clara's grip tightened, her nails digging into my palm, but she didn't look away. She stared straight at her mom, her face stone cold. The prosecutor didn't buy it, and neither did the jury. They had the evidence, those forged insurance papers, the arsenic traces, Clara's testimony about overhearing Judith and Naomi at the hospital. The toxicology report was the nail in the coffin, proving the chocolates weren't some innocent mix-up. Judith's lawyer tried to pin it on Naomi, saying she'd acted alone, but Naomi took a plea deal early probation in exchange for spilling everything. She sat there in court, head down, admitting it was Judith's plan from the start. She wanted Clara gone, Naomi mumbled, barely audible. The money, the house, it'd all go to us. I felt sick hearing it, knowing they'd valued Clara's life so cheap. Judith got 6 years. Not enough, if you ask me, but it was something. Naomi walked free with her probation, a slap on the wrist that left a bitter taste. The judge's gavel came down, and that was it, over, at least in the legal sense. Clara didn't say a word as we left the courtroom, just leaned into me, her shoulders shaking. I wrapped my arm around her, guiding her through the crowd of reporters outside, their cameras flashing. "No comment," I growled, pushing past, and we made it to the car in one piece. She didn't cry until we were home, locked inside, and then it came quiet, broken sobs that tore me up worse than the poison ever did. We decided to leave Boston after that. Too many ghosts, too many memories tied to that apartment, to Judith's house, to the whole damn city. I got released from the hospital 2 weeks after the arrest, and by then, we'd already started packing. Clara cut off her family completely. No calls, no letters, nothing. "They're dead to me," she'd said one night, folding clothes into a box, her voice flat. I didn't argue. How could I? They tried to take her from me, and I'd almost lost everything because of it. We picked a small town in Vermont, quiet and green, far from the Lancaster name and all its poison, literal and otherwise. The move was quick. I found a job with a local investment firm, something steady, less stress than Boston. Clara set up her freelance studio again, working from a spare room in our new place, a little house with a porch and a view of the mountains. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, and that mattered more than anything. The first few weeks were strange, adjusting to the silence, the slower pace. I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting Judith to show up with that fake smile of hers. But she was locked away, and Naomi was a state away, out of our lives. We were safe, finally. One evening, as the leaves started turning gold outside, Clara and I sat on the porch with mugs of tea, watching the sun dip below the hills. She'd been quiet all day, lost in her head, and I let her be. "You okay?" I asked, my voice soft. She nodded, staring into her mug. "Yeah, just thinking about it all." I reached over, resting my hand on her knee. "We made it through, Clara. That's what counts." She looked at me then, her hazel eyes softer than they'd been in months. "I know. I just hate that it happened. That they hated me that much." I squeezed her leg, my chest tight. "They didn't deserve you. Never did." She smiled, small but real, and leaned her head on my shoulder. The air was cool, the night settling in, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lift, just a little. We weren't whole yet, not after everything, but we were getting there. I thought about the trial, the way Judith's face had crumpled when the verdict came down. Justice, sure, but it didn't erase the betrayal. Still, sitting there with Clara, I knew we'd won something bigger. They'd tried to break us, and they'd failed. I kissed the top of her head, breathing her in, and she murmured, "Love you, Liam. Love you too." I said, and meant it more than ever. The days after that got easier. I started running again, slow at first, building my strength back. Clara's laugh came more often, her sketches filling the house with color. We were starting over, piece by piece, and it felt right. Judith and Naomi were a scar, but scars fade. We'd made it out, and that was enough. We'd been in Maine for a few months now, settling into our new life in a sleepy coastal town where the air smelled like salt and pine. The house was small, a weathered gray cottage with a creaky porch and a view of the ocean that stretched out forever on clear days. I'd landed a job with a local investment firm, nothing flashy, just steady work that let me leave the office behind at 5. Clara had reopened her freelance design studio, turning the spare bedroom into a chaos of sketch pads and paint tubes. She was smiling again, not all the time, but enough that I could see the old her creeping back, the woman I'd fallen for years ago in Boston. It was late October, the kind of crisp autumn day that made the leaves glow red and gold against the gray sky. I'd come home from work early, my tie already loosened, and found Clara in the kitchen, humming to herself as she stirred something on the stove. The smell of soup, potato, maybe, filled the air, warm and comforting. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. She turned, her hair tied back with a scarf, and gave me that soft smile that still got me every time. "Hey yourself. Good day." I shrugged, leaning against the counter. "Not bad. Quiet. You." She nodded, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't place. "Same. Got a logo done for a client." "Oh, and this came for you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small card box, no bigger than my hand, and slid it across the counter. I frowned, picking it up. No label, just plain white cardstock, a little worn at the edges. "What's this?" I asked, glancing at her. She leaned back against the sink, crossing her arms, her smile growing. "You'll want to sit for this," she said, her voice light but teasing. I raised an eyebrow, curious now, and pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. "Okay, you've got my attention," I said, sitting down and flipping the box open. Inside was a tiny baby onesie, white with little blue letters stitched across the front. "Sweetest surprise coming soon." I stared at it, my brain stalling out, then looked up at Clara. She was watching me, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes bright. "You're?" I started, my voice catching. She nodded, biting her lip. "We're having a baby, Liam." For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Just sat there, the onesie in my hands, the words sinking in. Then it hit me, a rush of joy so big it nearly knocked me over. "Holy crap," I whispered, standing up so fast the chair scraped the floor. I crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her into my arms, lifting her off her feet. She laughed, a real, full laugh, and wrapped her arms around my neck. "When'd you find out?" I asked, setting her down but not letting go, my hands on her waist. "This morning," she said, her cheeks pink. "Took a test after you left. Then another one, just to be sure." I grinned, my heart pounding. "A baby. We're having a baby." She nodded again, and I saw the tears welling up. Happy ones this time. Best birthday present ever, I said, my voice thick, and she laughed through her own tears. Your birthday's not for months, dummy. Doesn't matter, I said, kissing her soft at first, then deeper, like I could pour everything I felt into it. We stood there in the kitchen for a while, holding each other, the soup bubbling forgotten on the stove. My mind raced, jumping from one thought to the next, names, a crib, how we'd tell people. But mostly, I just felt full, like everything we'd been through had led to this. You okay with this? Clara asked after a bit, pulling back to look at me. Okay, I said, incredulous. Clara, I'm over the moon. Are you? She smiled, resting her forehead against mine. Yeah, scared, but yeah. I nodded, brushing her hair back. Me too. We'll figure it out. That night, we sat on the porch after dinner, bundled in blankets against the chilly sea breeze. The sky was clear, stars sharp above the water, and I held Clara's hand, her fingers laced through mine. The soup had been good, potato and leek, she'd said, and we'd eaten it with bread from the bakery down the road, talking about nothing and everything. Now, with the quiet settling in, I looked at her, her profile soft in the dim light. Not eating those chocolates was the best decision you ever made, I said, half joking. She chuckled, squeezing my hand. And you eating them all might have saved both of us. I laughed, the sound low and warm. Yeah, guess I'm a hero now. She rolled her eyes, but her smile stayed. Don't get cocky. We sat there, the waves crashing faintly in the distance, and I thought about it, how close we'd come to losing everything. Judith and Naomi, the arsenic, the hospital, it felt like another life, one we'd left behind. And now this, a baby, a fresh start. It wasn't just luck. It was us, fighting through the mess, coming out stronger. You think it's a boy or a girl? I asked, my thumb rubbing over her knuckles. She shrugged, leaning into me. Don't care. As long as it's healthy. I nodded, picturing it, a little kid running around this house, laughing, making a mess. We'll need a bigger place eventually, I said, thinking out loud. Yeah, she agreed. But this is good for now. It was. The cottage was small, but it was home, and it'd be home for the three of us soon enough. I kissed her hand, feeling the cool metal of her ring against my lips. Love you, I said, simple and true. Love you too, she murmured, resting her head on my shoulder. The night stretched out, peaceful and ours, and I let myself believe it. This was the sweet we'd earned, the kind no one could take away.